Texas, you just don't throw a brat on the grill. As the #1 premium smoked sausage in Texas, we know what Texans like on their table. I'm Mike Kilbasa. Give us a try, and you'll understand why we're the best in the business.
Good evening and welcome to Catholicism Live. I'm happy to be here. I'm Alan Becker, your host tonight for Catholicism Live, and we are continuing our series on theology of the body. My guest tonight, and Dr. David Delaney, welcome back.
Thank you, Alan. I'm glad to be here.
You bet. Thank you. Dr. Delaney is the academic dean for the Mexican American Catholic College. And Mock has some summer courses going on right now. Is that right?
We do. We're about finishing our second week. Well, I suppose in the middle of our second week of coursework for the summer. We have 4 classes, 2 in English, 2 in Spanish. 2 of them are theology, 2 in philosophy.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so folks who are out there, www.maccsa, that's maccsa.org. And if they're not, they missed the summertime, but they can sign up now for fall classes, right?
They can, yes. The class lineup is available under academics. If you go to our website, go under academics, and you'll see a link to our schedule for the fall.
Great, and we are very, very pleased to have Dr. Delaney with us discussing theology of the body. And if you've been following us, we are in episode 7 tonight. We'll do a little bit of recap first. Episode 4, just a few weeks ago, we talked about, and in line with the Easter time, we talked about Jesus' body, the humanity of Jesus, his passion, death, and resurrection, of the humanity of him. And then we shifted to the next episode, episode 5, to Christ's body, the mystical body of Christ, his divinity. And of course, we can't separate that. It's not his humanity and then his divinity. It is together is a composite body of Christ, as we know from our Catholic theology stuff. The last episode was Offer It Up. We had some discussions on liturgy and sacraments, and David, if I recall, we had some good discussion, but we left some dangling things out there. So maybe we could wrap up a couple things to start tonight with sacraments, trying to roll us in, the access we have to the grace of God. How does theology of the body, how does that fit in with the ideas of that? And then we'll introduce tonight's topic.
Okay, thank you, Alan, for the opportunity. Yes, the relevance of sacraments to our lives seems kind of strange to many, I think, as Catholics that have grown up without a very strong catechesis, which unfortunately I think is perhaps a good number of us. I remember hearing that vaguely that one had to live a sacramental life, and I remember thinking, oh, what does that mean?
Yeah, what is that?
But our access to our communion with God, we were made for communion with God. Our access to communion with God is through the sacraments. Our capacity for becoming what it is we want to be is through the sacraments. For Catholics, the ordinary means of communion with God is the sacramental system. And so the sacraments of initiation, are those that bring us into communion with God in a full and complete way. One of those, the sacrament of the Eucharist, is this ongoing reaffirmation, if you will, or continuing to strengthen us in this communion with God. It is an encounter with the persons that we were created to be in union with. We call this grace. Grace transforms us. It has the capacity, anyway, to transform us if we are open to it. If we become enough masters of ourselves that we can make it fruitful. We make it fruitful, and this is, I think that, I don't remember if I've offered this analogy before, but a natural sponge. A natural sponge is an important mental model that I like to use.
Sure.
The natural sponge, if you've ever had a natural sponge before, you know that when you get it, it's very absorbent. you sop up a lot of water with it. Well, a natural sponge, though, is kind of curious. If you've had this natural sponge and you've lost it in a closet for a while, a couple years, and you bring it out, no longer is it absorbent. You try to sop up the same kind of the water you did before, and it just kind of scratches over the top. Well, this, I think, is a good analogy for our lives. The sponge is our souls. Our soul, and the water in this analogy is grace. Mm-hmm. Our souls were made to sop up this grace. We're made to make this grace fruitful. Well, when the sponge is supple, this is our hearts, our souls, when they are fruitful. They have the capacity to make use of God's grace. The hard sponge is when our souls harden by disordered self-love, by sin, by turning inward. When we finally confess our sins after a long time without having confessed them, or repented sufficiently to receive this grace of confession, or of this sacrament of confession, our hearts, our souls still may be this hard sponge, this hard soul that the grace is there, but we can't cooperate with it.
We're not able to receive it because we're not open to it. Our body-soul composite has not been prepared properly.
Right. Or we can receive it without making it very fruitful.
Right.
The amount that the sponge, our souls can absorb this water, this grace, they were made to completely absorb it. The more we can absorb it, the more we make it fruitful. This is what the analogy is meant to show. Well, how do we make it fruitful? How do we get our hard souls supple again? Well, we soak them in grace.
Right.
We have to soak our souls in grace, and our access to grace, our continuing access to grace, the normal means of the sacraments,
right.
The sacrament of confession, the sacrament of Holy Communion, of the Eucharist. But it's not just that. We have to also allow ourselves to cooperate with this. If you put that sponge in grace, in water, it very slowly starts to absorb it.
To get supple again, yeah.
Yes, but you can make that much more efficacious by massaging it. Well, the massaging in this analogy is our exercising through the cardinal virtues, practicing the virtues, being fully self-masters, practicing prudence, justice, fortitude, and which one did I miss?
Yeah, I know, and I'm trying to think of the fortitude off the top of my head.
Temperance.
Temperance, there you go.
Yes, every chance we can.
Very good.
So, this is a real-world application. This is a real-world analogy that allows us to recognize what it is that our lives were made for. We can only find our joy by becoming holy, by becoming fully self-masters. And we only can master ourselves fully by soaking in grace
and cooperating
with it.
Amen. So many of us take our bodies to Sunday Mass, and we pay attention and we watch what goes on, but maybe we don't prepare our souls like we should. We need to prepare both our body and our soul for that Mass, and one way to do that is to attend Mass more often.
Yes.
Maybe attend daily Mass and or go to confession more often, to use this sacramental system and to soak up that grace. We are here on this earth just a short time, and we need to take advantage of every opportunity we can to receive the grace of God. So the sponge, I'll remember that. Very, very good. I like that. So that was kind of a wrap-up of where we were last week. As we head into this week, our episode number 7 title is, It's Not Hard, But It Is Humanly Impossible. Now, where did that come from? And okay, Dr. Delaney, explain that a little bit. How does that wrap in, and how does that flow from grace, sacraments, and into conscience and morality is kind of what we're going to talk about tonight.
Indeed, yes.
Build the bridge for us.
Okay, let me try. Yes, it's not something that I could create myself. This is a phrase, or perhaps a paraphrase, but it comes from G.K. Chesterton, the great convert from the late 19th or early 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and what his point was here is that he's talking about Christian living, authentic Christian living, and living an authentic Christian life, and he's saying that it's not hard, but it is humanly impossible. In other words, we have the capacity as human beings. In a certain sense, it's natural. It's natural to us because that's what we were created for. but it is humanly impossible, meaning that one requires grace in order to be able to do it. One cannot do it alone, but one is called to do it. One has this charge of doing it. We have free will. We have an intellect and a will, a free will, to be able to know and to choose that for which we were created. And Chesterton is telling us here that we are drawn in a certain sense, in a certain way, to that for which we were created. It's not hard, it's part of what we were created for. But in our fallen state, we are so inclined to support or meet the needs, if you will, of the material aspect of our natures, or bodily aspect of our nature, that we can very easily rationalize, and we always do, why that ought to take precedence over the spiritual aspect. Oftentimes, the serving the needs of the bodily aspect of our human nature is important, but sometimes we do that to excess, extreme, and sometimes we do it at the expense of the overall good.
Of our souls. Very good.
Yes.
Well, if you're here listening in on CTSA Channel 15, welcome, and welcome to all of our listeners on KJMA 89.7 FM. And if you want to hook up other folks across the country, we can be heard on www.grn online. I happened to be in Colorado about a month ago, and I heard the show GRN online. It came through loud and clear. I didn't call in. I was in the middle of a few other things. If you want to email us, live@catholic.org. live@catholic.org. We can't monitor it right away during the show, but we will answer your questions after the show and before the next one. This is a live show. We encourage call-ins. If you want to know more about the sponge and the sacraments, you want to know about moving into It's Not Hard But Humanly Impossible, because we're going to get into some good morality concepts here, and we'd like to spur questions and encourage you to call in 210-734-5371. 734-5371. We'll be taking calls in just a few minutes. So G.K. Chesterton helped us set the stage here about we as humans, not hard to live the sacramental life, to cooperate with God, but we cannot do it alone.
Exactly.
And that's the bottom line of there. So we are created in the image of God, and how do we, in practical way, how do we do the steps in order to cooperate with God? How do I know my conscience could be faulty, and where do I turn to do that? Let's discuss some of that a little bit.
Thank you, Alan, for that lead. And that is a very important question, and it's a very difficult question to answer very succinctly, at least for me, as you know. But I think what we can do, what I'd like to try to do here, is maybe take a couple of minutes to draw on some of the themes, some of the things that we've talked about before, and show how all of these threads lead up to this very question. Good. This question is something that really is our task, the reason that we are here on earth in the time that we are, the reason that we have a period of time that God gives us to be able to accomplish this task well. So let's talk a little bit about who we are. We talked initially about who we were. We're made in the image of God, a Trinitarian God, a communion of persons. We were made really for receiving ourselves and giving ourselves to one another, totally. First to God and then to one another.
And that was original man, right?
That's right.
Original man.
Original man. This is we are created in that image, and we still have that image. Though John Paul kind of says we lose the likeness somewhat of God.
Right.
We're made in the image and likeness of God. With the fall, though, we have lost this capacity for forgiving ourselves. Previously, it was a natural reality, a simple reality, that you would see someone else and you would know that they were made in the image and likeness of God for communion with one another. And you would want their good, regardless of your own good.
Sure, and if I recall back then of that was Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and walking in the cool of the evening with God, and naked without shame.
Without shame, yes.
So that was the state of which God created man for. But through the fall, through historical man, we are struggling with that now. So we need to make sure we understand what our moral compass and our conscience, and where do we apply this. So that's a little bit of what we've done before. Continue on. Let's take us to the next step.
Well, shame is very important, because this is kind of, John Paul sees shame as having a twofold purpose, one of which is recognizing that we are falling short, that we are now concerned more about our desires, our needs, than the good of the other. And so shame gives us a little bit of insight into that. And so it brings upon us a little bit of fear of the other and of ourselves. So we recognize at some level, we recognize that we're not where we ought to be. And so we now have a task. We have a task of overcoming this inclination for our well-being, satisfying our needs, and especially for satisfying those needs that tend to be primarily associated with our material welfare, our material well-being. Those we have to recognize seem to, in many ways, are the most immediate. They're the ones that seem the most compelling, especially because a lot of our appetites and our emotions feed those, and those are made to help to move us beyond beyond where we are.
Sure, and I think
off the dime.
I think we've done that throughout. You ask a little child, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, a doctor, a lawyer, or somebody that makes a lot of money or things. Well, really what we should be teaching is you want to be a saint.
Yes.
You want to be a saint.
Exactly.
So maybe does that help a little bit, I think, of what you're talking about? We focus on the material things. You got to get along in this world. You got to do well. However, that's not our final goal. Our final goal is to be a saint.
And one of the ways that I think that we can do this, that we talked about a couple of times ago, and you liked this this particular distinction, is that we were made for happiness. We were made for joy. But there's a corollary of happiness and joy those happen primarily, they're spiritual.
Sure.
They happen primarily in our souls. The corollary to that, the analog to that in our bodily nature is pleasure.
Pleasure, right.
Pleasure, therefore, can oftentimes masquerade as joy, and we're oftentimes, therefore, drawn to pleasure. We have to recognize that pleasure is something that it's a good, but it's not the same as joy, and oftentimes joy is more of a fruit of suffering than it is of pleasure. Pleasure and joy can go together, but oftentimes they do not. And so we cannot see pleasure as a reliable guide to what it is that we were created for.
And I think one of the analogies we made, if I recall right, the more pleasure you have, the more it's used, it actually decreases.
Yes.
However, pure joy in the right frame, in the right spiritual setting, it increases because you give it away, and as you give it, it increases.
Exactly.
So I've had that.
Unlike joy, where it decreases when you share it.
Unlike pleasure, when
I'm sorry,
decreases. Yeah.
Thank you for
That's
correcting
okay.
me. Yes.
Very good.
Exactly right. So we have this task now. We have these elements that we've brought together. So we have this problem. We're in a fallen state. We're made for joy. We're seeking pleasure. And we have to therefore become sufficient masters of ourselves that we can, intellectually and with our whole body, soul unities, that we can discern between what is an authentic pleasure, what's an authentic good, and what is just an apparent one. And then have the resources, the personal strength, the fortitude to choose the right, to choose the good, even if it brings upon us not just pleasure but pain.
And how are we taught? Society tells us that it's all relative.
Yes.
I mean, we hear a lot of Pope Benedict XVI talking now, moral relativism. Well, if it's okay for you, I guess it's okay for you. I don't morally agree with it, but if it's okay with you, I can't tell you anything. Now, wait a minute. There are moral absolutes. There are laws. There are ways of structure that God gave us. So if we work on that, and who's the church to tell us that is going to inhibit our freedom?
Yes.
I mean, we have freedom, don't we? We ought to be able to do what we want when we want, right, at times? But we have to be careful of that, as how that works. The difference of pleasure, joy, our body, spirit. Make sure that composite is really composite as we go along. So, and there's a couple of questions that we have posted on the website, www.pilgrimcenterofhope.org. And we've had these questions. We sure would like you to call in with our questions. 210-734, call in with your questions. Don't ask our own questions. Again, we'll just do that here. 210-734-5371. And we've got a minute or two to a break. But as we look at our society today, many so-called practicing Catholics see nothing wrong with contraception, nothing wrong with Well, abortion in some cases, I guess it could be okay. Nothing wrong with sex outside of marriage. Well, I guess they really love each other and they're going to get married anyway. Okay, I can still be a Catholic and do that. So you've kind of taken this moral compass and kind of watered it down to our own physical pleasure.
Yes.
And there's danger in that. There's danger. But then why does the church take away our freedom to do that? How does that all work? How does that all work? In about a minute or so, if you can. Well, we'll pick that up again after the break when we get there.
We'll do what we can then, yes. This is a very important point. Freedom. Freedom is oftentimes misunderstood in our day and age. And because of that, they think people, even Catholics, think the church is somehow against freedom, as though the church thinks and society thinks that we need to restrict people's freedoms for the good of other people. But really, that's a mistaken notion of freedom. In reality, the church recognizes that freedom is very important, but there's a distinction between what the world says and the church says. The church says that to be human, you have to have freedom, and you have to have the free exercise of freedom. But freedom is a means to something else. It's a means to the end. It's a means to the end of good. Society,
so freedom is not an end in itself.
Exactly. This is the opposite. Society thinks it's an end in itself.
Okay, so that's the moral relativism that we've been told, and then how that works out. Well, that's a tidbit. You're going to get more right after the break. This is Catholicism Live, and we're talking theology of the body. Get your questions ready, 210-734-5371. If you'd like to email us, live@catholic.org. We'll be here for some more questions and some more answers, and we'll have some more discussion on freedom and moral relativism. And we'll be right back after the break. Thank you.
If you're thinking of running, we can help. Texas Runaway Hotline, 1-888-580-HELP. The call is free and confidential.
Right now, America is being counted in the 2010 census. When a census taker comes to your door, they will ask you the 10 easy questions that appear on the 2010 census form. By answering the questions, your residents will be counted, and you'll be helping your community get its fair share of $400 billion in federal funds. Your participation in the 2010 census is vital and required by law. For more information, visit 2010census.gov.
The Alexander House announces the largest conference of its kind, coming to the AT&T Center in San Antonio, Texas. Internationally known radio and television personality and conference speaker, Father John Karapi, is coming to San Antonio. His life story takes him from his days as a Vietnam-era veteran to a successful businessman to a homeless drug addict to the Catholic priesthood, ordained by Pope John Paul II. Father John Karapi at the AT&T Center in San Antonio, Texas, Saturday, August 7th, 2010. Proceeds will benefit the Alexander House Marriage Ministry. Be part of the experience and help save marriages. Visit FatherKarapiSA.com.
Life can challenge us with new problems that can lead to overwhelming stress. These can fracture families, separate, and keep us from having a joyful and productive life. You're not alone. Catholic Consultation Center's mission is to walk this journey with you, using good psychological practice and a spiritual Catholic foundation. Reach out now to Catholic Consultation Center. Let them help you restore hope in your life.
Welcome back. You're listening to Catholicism Live, and welcome back all our KJMA 89.7 FM fans. Welcome back CTSA Channel 15. We have Dr. David Delaney here, the Academic Dean to the Mexican American Catholic College. Theology of the body is our topic. We're on episode 7. And there are other ways of learning about theology of the body, maybe getting a little bit more than just this 1-hour show that we can on here about every other week as our schedule has been. Call the Archdiocese. archsa.org is the website, and talk about the Office of Marriage and Family Life. The Office of Marriage and Family Life is offering Introduction to the Theology of the Body. Saturday, July 17th. Mark your calendar. Next month, Saturday, July 17th, is an all-day 9 to 4 Introduction to Theology of the Body. Very, very good to immerse yourself a little bit more in the beautiful gift that Pope John Paul II gave to us. Website, pilgrimcenterofhope.org. We'll be announcing a few things later on. We're here in episode 7. Dr. Delaney, we were talking about freedom. And our human freedom, our society tells us that is our goal, that is our end. So whatever we can do, some of this stuff is relative, we can just keep on going, but freedom is our end. But that's not true, is it?
It's not. And the fact, when we think of freedom as an end, it leads to a particular way of thinking. It leads to a legalism. What I would say legalism is when you have the view that law in our culture, I think we have this view in general, that law is at best, at very best, it is a necessary evil.
Right.
That
Right.
it's there to restrict our freedom. Because after all, our freedom ought to be able to be exercised independently. And so anytime anybody tells you you can't do something, that's a violation of your rights. And so sometimes we might have to have this violation of our rights, just to protect one another. But I think this legalism that has arisen in our society is one that really is not a biblical one.
Sure. And we kind of think of the Catholic Church yet as that set of rules and set of laws and thou shalt nots and do nots and say, well, wait a minute, all this nots can do. But we can take the theology of the body and the ideas of it in the church and turn that around. And the biblical view of that, we can just point out, you'd look anywhere in Scripture to see some differences. Let's pick one. How about Psalm 119?
That's a very good one.
Is that a good one to pick? A prayer to God, the lawgiver. We acknowledge God has given us the law. Moses came down the 10 Commandments. The gospel just this last week during the daily reading. Jesus did not come to abolish the law. He came to fulfill the law, to turn the law for us. Verse 2 in Psalm 119, happy those who observe God's decrees, who seek the Lord with all their heart. So the decrees and the laws are there. Verse 8, I will keep your laws, do not leave me all alone. In verse 10 and 11, with all my heart I seek you, do not let me stray from your commands. In my heart I treasure your promise, that I may not sin against you. Well, now wait a minute. How does our freedom work within the law? Is that what we're trying to say here with it? Do we have to work within the law to be free?
That's exactly what the biblical worldview is. Alan, up until about the 14th century with William of Ockham, we had the view, in general, the view was that the law, that which came from our fathers, that which came before us, was this wisdom. The law was this writing down, this documenting of wisdom of all that went before. It was understood as you were reading. In going on, if you were to read through the rest of the Psalm 119, you would see that it was a light to his, God's law is a lamp for our pathway. It's this lamp through this minefield of life. It's a user's manual, the law is. It tells us who God is and who we are and how we're supposed to operate, if we are supposed to, how we're to behave, if we are to be happy, if we are to be in accord with the way that we were created. Law now when with Ockham, and I won't get into too much of William of Ockham, but ultimately he started with God. He put God's will as an absolute, so much so that God's nature was arbitrary. God's will had to be the absolute. And that has slowly migrated into our lives, where our life has to be absolute, so much so that we get to define our own nature these days. We can define what our sexual identity is. We can define what our gender is. We can define whatever it is that we want.
Now they've got to put science versus morality here. Be careful. Just because science says we can do it doesn't mean that it is morally correct to do it. Is that
or
right?
even possible.
Right.
When science tells us something, they look at us. They're just looking at our bodies. They have no access to our souls.
There you go.
And so, what is in fact, when they think that they can make your body look differently and then make you different, they're not. It's a mutilation of your body because they can't reconfigure your soul, and so it's just masking and perhaps more than that, it's exacerbating some underlying problem. So the important thing is for healing in our fallenness, in our brokenness, we need to understand who we are, and then find out why we don't experience who we are in the way that we should, and resolve those issues. If we don't have our nature as the grounding, as the goal for which we are trying to move ourselves, we will never find ourselves. We will never find the happiness, the joy for which we were created. This is the view of legalism. This is the view that legalism gets us to. And so with legalism comes more and more misery.
So it forces that on us. It actually thinks that it's giving us the freedom to avoid the law. It actually shackles us with more law to burden us down because we have to follow this way, rather than the freedom within the law.
Exactly.
If that follows.
And I can give you a couple of examples that show you. I have to tell you, the first time I heard this difference between, this idea of freedom outside of the law, freedom inside of the law, I have to say that, well, that seems a little bit arbitrary to me. But in thinking about it, I can see that that's actually the case. And there's a distinction in freedoms that outside the law, inside the law, that I think a recently deceased theologian, moral theologian, he was a Belgian Dominican, Father Servet Pinkers. He distinguished between freedom of indifference and freedom for excellence. And I think that this is a good way of looking at it. The freedom of indifference means that it's that freedom outside the law. It's this idea that it doesn't matter what we choose, it just matters that we do choose.
We do choose, yeah.
Which is very, very misguided.
Very dangerous.
It is. That, we say that when we're encouraged to vote. It doesn't matter how you choose, just as long as you do choose. Well, you better be careful, because you could elect Adolf Hitler that way. Adolf Hitler was brought into power through free election. I won't get into precisions of actually how that happened, but it was it was a freely elected election that ended up leading to his being in power. We have to be very careful. There is a right and wrong to choose. So freedom of indifference doesn't work, and we can see that in our lives. If we just choose arbitrarily, well, let's say with food, if we just choose arbitrarily, we will get unhealthy, we will get fat. If we choose arbitrarily, we may get addicted to eating and get more than just fat, become very, very unhealthy, and not be able to stop. Anybody that's ever tried to go on a diet knows that if you choose wrongly, going on a diet, if you transform,
won't help you at all.
It won't help you, and in fact, it becomes almost a superhuman activity to try to get on a diet to control your choices. Getting up in the morning. If you've ever hit the alarm or the snooze button a few times, the first time, you may have been getting up every time it first went off. The first time you hit the snooze button, the next morning it's a little bit easier. Yeah. And by the third or fourth morning, it seems nearly impossible to get back up again.
Who are you a slave to? You're a slave to there, or are you a slave to freedom within yourself?
And slavery is the very important point. We become enslaved to decisions when decisions are made in opposition to the good, in opposition to what we know is right. And therefore, one cannot call something freedom worthy of the word if simply by exercising it, you lose it.
Right.
So freedom of indifference is not real freedom, because by doing it, we lose our freedom. We become enslaved to our decisions. So authentic freedom is freedom for excellence. And freedom for excellence we know what that is. When we look at somebody who doesn't have the same weaknesses for food that we do, we look at them and say, I wish I had that person's hope. We yearn for freedom for excellence, and we regret our exercise of freedom of indifference. And so there's a real world order, a real truth to things. We have to know what it is and choose in accord with it. If our choices are not free, then they don't damage us. When they are free, and this is why freedom is so important, it has to be a free choice. Free choices make us better or worse.
Right.
If they're not free, they don't change us at all.
And that's how God made us in the beginning. He gave us free will.
He did.
Gave that to us. And to learn more about the freedom, we just didn't come through the part of the theology of the body, but the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1730 to 1748. Article 3 on man's freedom. Wonderful reading. Wonderful reading. You know, you take a look at this sometimes and say, oh man, this is too deep. But take it and apply some of these principles, some of these eating disorders, or some of the things that we just talked about, and reread this, that God willed that man should be left in the hand of his own counsel, that he can freely attain his full and blessed perfection by cleaving to him, by cleaving to God, by following God's laws. It's not that our freedom is going to be by going against the law. You know, we're going to try that because our human nature is going to get us that. But our true freedom, our true joy versus pleasure, as we talked before, our true joy is going to make the free choices within the law, within the boundaries, within, and one thing we haven't brought up before too, but a lot of we talk about my will versus God's will. What is God's will for my life? So here is an example we can do this, the freedom, responsibility, and things that we have that we go along. Real freedom to be most human has to be fully mastery of oneself. We have to understand who we are, how we operate, and how to master ourselves. I thought that was humanly impossible.
Yes. Well,
Is it?
It is humanly impossible to the extent that we need it.
Right.
Everybody has different capabilities, different aptitudes with regard to virtues. Some of us have no virtues, and some of us may have certain strengths in some areas and large weaknesses in other areas. But to be able to fully master ourselves, because ultimately if we go back to our understanding of who we are, created in the image of total self-gift, we have to give ourselves totally away to God and to one another. Well, you can't give what you don't first possess. So self-mastery, full self-possession is the goal. It's the goal, and it is what it means to be fully human. We are fully human. In fact, it was, I forget, I usually get him wrong. But the early church father said this, that God's glory is man fully alive. And man fully alive means man fully in possession of himself, so that he gives himself away. So we are fully alive when we fully possess ourselves, so we can fully give ourselves away. This possession comes from our exercising of the virtues, always choosing rightly, always choosing with courage, with fortitude, the right thing, choosing prudently, choosing the right way, choosing the right thing the right way, choosing temperately, using God's goods, the goods that God has created for us, but using it in a way that is best for us and best for others. Always choosing when nobody is looking. This is how we know where we really are. How do we act when nobody else is around? I think your father probably told.
Sure, the definition
that.
of integrity. You
Yes.
bet, he talked integrity, when you do the right thing when nobody's looking.
And so, but that has to be done aided by grace. Remember, grace does three things. It heals fallen nature, it elevates fallen nature, and it perfects fallen nature. And so we need that to be able to, when we talked about some of these things needing superhuman efforts to overcome, we don't have superhuman effort on our own.
Can't go to Walmart to buy that.
No,
we
there's
can't.
only one place to get that, the superhuman himself.
That's right.
God.
Through God, through the sacraments of the Catholic Church as we go through there. What came to mind is John the Baptist. I must decrease,
Yes.
while he must increase. We have to give ourselves away. We have to open up ourselves in order to receive God's grace. And that comes with total freedom of being able to give ourselves away in total freedom.
Yes.
Rather than being bound by the poor decisions that we make.
Yes, we have to die to our old selves, to our fallen selves, and rise with Christ to our new selves, our new creation, our recreated selves. And that's a never-ending task till the day we die. The holiest saint will continually be uncovering aspects of themselves that they have not yet fully possessed. They have not yet fully surrendered.
Wow, very, very good. Well, the church talks about following your conscience. We've got about a minute for the next break here, Dr. Delaney. Our conscience, though, I mean, well, follow your conscience. What does your conscience say? Well, we have to make sure that that conscience is a well-formed conscience, because we can think, well, maybe I learned that wrong. Maybe I didn't learn it fully. Maybe I only got the first part of it and not the second part of it. And so we want to come back a little bit and talk about conscience. If you'd like to ask a question to Dr. Delaney, or as we continue this on, please give us a call at 210-734-5371. You want to think of a question after we're off the show tonight, email us at live@catholic.org. We're going to complete this episode, a wonderful talk on freedom and conscience, and even a little moral relativism. We can see how that's not. We're going to continue our discussion here after this break. It's Catholicism Live, and we'll be right back with you. Thank you very much.
You're not alone. Call the Texas Youth Hotline, a hotline for youth and families. 1-800-210-2278.
You're not alone.
Nobody told me that 35 years of research and dozens of medical studies have shown significant complications for women who've had an abortion. Learn the facts today.
Now we know an unborn baby is a human life. See what we've been missing.
Archbishop Gomez, on behalf of St. Mary Magdalene Parish staff and school, we want to congratulate you as you go to Los Angeles, and we thank you for your years of service here in San Antonio. Congratulations, Archbishop Gomez. We'll miss you. God bless you.
Welcome back. This is Catholicism Live. We're finishing up episode 7 of Theology of the Body with Dr. David Delaney from the Mexican American Catholic College. A few announcements from the Pilgrim Center of Hope. Get on the website, www.pilgrimcenterofhope, all one word, .com. There's a few episodes coming, or issues coming up that I'd like to, .org, I'm sorry, pilgrimcenterofhope.org. June 26th on a Saturday, 9 to 1, a day of prayer and healing. Saturday, July 10th is a Catholic Women's Luncheon. There was a luncheon a couple of months ago, if I recall, and this is another one at the Omni Hotel. Get on the website or give them a call, 210-521-3377. That's here in San Antonio, 521-3377. And also on Sunday, July 18th, those of you who are interested in a Holy Land trip in October to November, there is a meeting and a general meeting of inquiry from 1 to 3 on Sunday, July 18th. More about the Holy Land trip coming up in October, November, and we definitely want to keep Deacon Tom and Mary Jane in our prayers as they leave next week for our Holy Land trip. So we'll keep them and all the pilgrims, including Bishop Zurich, I understand, in their prayers for this trip. PilgrimCenterofHope.org. Well, we're talking about conscience. And we got to talk about what conscience is, and maybe we should start with what conscience is not.
Yes.
Let's start there, Dr. Delaney. Is that okay?
That's a very important question because it's oftentimes misunderstood.
Right.
Some people think that conscience is their feelings. Now, there are feelings associated with conscience. Usually guilt is a response to ignoring or going against, I should say, a well-formed conscience. But the lack of guilt doesn't necessarily mean that one is not guilty of a sin or violating their conscience. For the very reason that conscience, well, we're going to define conscience in a second, but
sure.
A conscience is something that can be squelched, that the less you pay attention to it, the more you squelch it, the easier it is to ignore. So conscience is not just feelings. It's not primarily feelings. Conscience in itself is not feelings. Feelings come from violating a conscience,
okay.
But it's not feelings. Another thing conscience is not, it's not a direct access to divine revelation. And so conscience can never be put in opposition to authoritative church teaching. To say that I have to follow I know what the church teaches, but I have to follow my conscience. Well, to be able to do that, then one has to be able to say that the church has, that somehow you have received this directly from God in contradiction to what we as Catholics recognize, that Jesus Christ established the church, established St. Peter as the guide of the church in union with all of the other bishops, St. Peter and his successors, as the authoritative interpreter and guardian of that which he has revealed to us. And so conscience can't be used in opposition to authoritative church teaching, because conscience doesn't give you divine revelation. Conscience is something else. Conscience is actually a process of discerning once one has received divine revelation from a reliable source.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and so maybe we can talk a little bit now. Well, therefore it's not personal opinion either.
Right. Yeah, that's usually what it is. Well, my conscience tells me to do this, and I learned this, and I saw somebody do that, so I thought that was a good idea. Whether it follows the laws of God, which is interpreted through the laws of His holy church. Yes. As we go through that. So that is what it's not. It's not a feeling, it's not contradictory to divine revelation, and it's not your personal opinion. Well, then how do we work toward this well-formed conscience? How do we develop it?
We have to recognize then what it is. It's a faculty. It's actually three parts, a faculty, a three-step process, if you will. Conscience is something that it's an awareness of absolute moral norms, of what is right and wrong. One is aware of this. In some ways, we have this inbuilt to us. God has written it in our souls,
our hearts, yeah,
and our
right. Our souls.
And so, but oftentimes our culture can make that very difficult to see. But the way to know it, the way to be formed, to have a well-formed conscience, to be aware of absolute moral norms, is to have it explicitly given to us by a reliable source, mm-hmm. which we know to be the Holy Catholic Church. The Catechism of the Catholic Church tells us that it is a sure guide to the faith and moral teachings of Jesus Christ Himself, given to and guarded by the Church. And so our awareness, we have this obligation, therefore, to be informed, to form our consciences by being formed in what the truth is. And like in civil law, ignorance of the law is no excuse.
Right.
It's not a valid excuse. If we have the wherewithal, if we are baptized, confirmed adult Catholics, the fact that our family life is so busy and our work life is so busy, it still doesn't excuse us from guarding that which is most precious, our souls and the souls of our family, our children, whom we are called to be the first teachers of. That's not the church's first responsibility. It's our responsibility as parents to raise our children.
But God is all merciful, so whatever we do, He's merciful. He's going to take care of us, right?
That's another issue. God is all merciful, but in God, mercy and justice are both the same thing.
The justice.
They're two sides of the same coin. If you are not being just to your children, if they can do whatever they want to and never and the consequences of their actions are never made manifest, how much how much dignity do you give to your children by not taking their decisions seriously?
Sure.
And God has given us great dignity. He has given us free will, and He takes very seriously our decisions and the ramifications thereof. And so in His mercy, in His justice, He allows us to. In His mercy, He calls us to turn back to Him.
Turn back
but
to the moral
He, in justice to Him and to us, He will never force that decision. So we have this awareness then of the first step. The second step then is that once we know what right and wrong is, we have a concrete circumstance we have to apply that to.
That decision
Right.
of our environment, of where we're at, yes.
Right. We have to say, okay, I know that, for example, stealing is wrong.
Right.
I am in a particular situation, though, that I am hungry. I have no ability to feed myself, and there's food there from somebody that taking that food from them will not deprive them of what they need for their livelihood, and so one says, okay, stealing is always and everywhere wrong, but also I have the responsibility for my life.
Right.
And so is that, in this situation, stealing? Now there's a few more things that one needs to know. For example, the social teaching of the universal destination of goods. That's an important Catholic social teaching. All that means is that we are these gifts that God has given us, we're stewards over. We don't own absolutely.
Right.
And so if we see that somebody is in danger of death, we are obligated to, if we have the means, to help them to overcome that, to give them what they need immediately. And so in that situation, it might be a little bit of a complex situation, but it's a fairly common question that comes up. One applies a judgment to a concrete situation, and if one applies that correctly, they see in that situation that it would not be stealing. Okay. But if someone were to make the incorrect judgment that it were stealing, and one were to make that judgment, there's a third step of applying that. There's a judgment about these, was it right or was it wrong?
Right, the feedback loop. Basically.
Exactly.
Knowing it, actually practicing it, and then the feedback loop would be kind of a way I'd go step 1, step 2, step 3.
That's
pretty
very
close?
good.
That's pretty close.
And so the judgment now is, was it right or is it right before I do it? And was it right after I do it?
After you do it. So you assess it both before and after. And
right.
Make that
or
decision.
Sometimes if it happens too quickly, you have to do the assessment afterwards. But in general, hopefully these decisions are made beforehand. If you judge that it violates, in this specific concrete situation, violates a moral norm, you can't act against it. You have to act in accord with what your conscience is. If you act against it, you may be wrong about your judgment. You may be wrong about the moral norm, but it doesn't matter because if you act against your conscience, then you are wrong.
Wow. Wow. And how to build that well-formed conscience and how to do those steps. Again, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraphs 1776. That's a good number to remember. 1776 to 1802. Moral conscience. The judgment of conscience. Again, when you read this the first time, you look at, wow, this is too hard, this is too deep. But think about situations that you've been in. Think about your conscience. Think about the choices that you make. Think about the understanding that the world teaches us that this is okay because it feels good. This is okay because everybody's doing it, so it must be okay. Take a look at the Catechism. Take a look at that. Give yourselves time to do step 1, which is awareness of the absolute moral principles. Yes. Aware and study to do that. As we finish up the hour went very fast. Dr. Delaney, thank you very much. We can't stop without introducing our Pearl of the Week and our Saint of the Week. We have a Pearl of the Week if you get on the website, www.pilgrimcenterofhope.org. The Pearl of the Week, Theology of the Body Made Simple, by Father Anthony Percy. Mm-hmm. And you'll see that on the website, and you'll be able to pick that up. This one, excuse me, this one is especially for teenagers, and so it's set up for that. Our Saint of the Week. Whoop, pardon me.
Yes. Yes.
Saint of the week, Saint Ephraim.
Saint Ephraim. Saint Ephraim is one of my favorite saints. I think, in fact, you have a little bit of a one of his poems there to read that reminds me very much of. He talks about he was very much into. He was a theologian, a doctor of the church, but he also wrote these poems that were very insightful. And he talks about the fact that our souls are the brides of Christ, and our bodies are His bridal chamber. And this harkens very much to St. John of the Cross, which was a very strong insight for John Paul II, and much of what we talked about with regard to our relationship with Christ and the church.
Wow. Well, St. Ephraim, born in the early 300s, was taught the Christian mysteries by St. James, the famous Bishop of Nisibis. And Nisibis is today in modern Turkey. So he was a deacon, ordained a deacon, and to try to go against the heresies of his time, wrote many beautiful hymns and beautiful poems and beautiful writings, which we have many, many today. The soul is your bride, the body is your bridal chamber, as you mentioned. That was beautiful, and as that came through St. Ephraim, we can learn that, and all the hymns and songs and the things. What a beautiful way to wrap that up, our body-soul composite, as we go through. Theology of the Body, this was episode number 7, and we have episode number 8 coming up in 2 weeks. It'll be the earth in heaven. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk a little about the last things as we wrap up this segment, all 8 episodes in Theology of the Body. Continue to follow us on www.pilgrimcenterofhope.org, and as we take a look at how we can form our conscience, how we can make better moral judgments. And we don't ever stop this, Dr. Delaney, do we? This continues to the rest of our life. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Every single judgment, every single decision that we make, we should always be trying to evaluate, because we want to always choose the good. Choosing the good, choosing when nobody is watching, is the source of our joy. You will experience untold joy and happiness when you choose, when you come to work, to know the good and to choose the good. Sometimes it may be painful, but it will always lead to joy.
Sure. Kind of like a little child can say, I did it all by myself, huh?
Amen.
You like that?
Amen.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Delaney, the Mexican American Catholic College. Get on their website, maccsa.org. Check out the courses that they're having and the things there are. Check out the pilgrimcenterofhope.org. Check out the archdiocesesa.org. The Family Life has some Theology of the Body work there. Thank you for KJMA listening in, 89.7. If you think of a question, live at catholic.org. I'm Alan Becker, and it's been a pleasure being your host tonight. Episode 7, we'll be back in 2 weeks with Episode 8, Earth in Heaven. And everyone have a good night. God bless you all, and thank you.
In Texas, sausage making is a time-honored craft. That's why we don't add monosodium glutamate, phosphates, and other hard-to-pronounce ingredients into our sausage. Hi, I'm Mike Kilbasa. Read our label and you'll understand why we're the best in the business.